Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake. I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum. Today we are in the Fantasy Circle. Today we got a program for you entitled Privacy Through Planting. We've got Greg Paige, our Director of Horticulture. He's going to talk to you about all manner of screening plants, not just your thuja green giants, but we're going to get a little bit creative, give you some ideas about some fun and interesting plants you can use for privacy screening. Okay, and I think that is enough announcements for now, so I will pass things over to Greg to tell us about some plants one might use for some privacy screening.
Hello, and thanks for joining. As Blake allured to, there's lots of stuff going on. I think, and I completely concur about the ephemeral arts posts. We put out 9 yesterday and 3 more today, and the ones we put out were the ones just below us he was talking about. As I was walking up here to come back and I put those out, they caught me by surprise because they look like they've always been there and should be there. And also Blake has kind of hit me to the concept of coming here at different times of the day. I'm here all day long. I'm running almost as fast as Tim, not quite, a few steps behind, but it's amazing how the garden looks different at different times of the day. So I imagine last night was quite spectacular to be out here in the moonlight, and but that just makes things look even more better as coming out at different times of the day. So encourage you to do that. Also tag teaming on something he mentioned, the plant sale. The online sale has been extended. The in-person sale is the Day of Raulston Blooms, which is Saturday, April 29th. There's a lot of stuff that's sold out, and we're going to try our best to refresh with some of the things that were popular, but there's going to be some new things. So if you're one of those plant savvy people that's constantly checking to see what's on there and what is or isn't sold out, there's going to be some new stuff on there probably early next week. So it behooves you to come back. So in the theme of what we're talking about, it would be great to run around the garden and look at different examples of things to use for privacy screening. We just can't do that. We're not to that point yet. We need to get one of those cameras with the gyroscope in it that you can run around and move around and it stays nice and level. If somebody wants to get one of those for us, we'll take it off your hands. But so we've come to a place that it's shady because it's hot today. It has a lot of the things that I want to talk about, and it's close to the McSwain Center, so we didn't have to bring all of they didn't have to bring all their stuff up. And I brought some plants that we can talk about. And these are some things that are in the sale. And before I talk about the plants, let's talk a little bit about why you would use plants for privacy screening. Plants can provide some different types of screening. There's visual, of course. There's sound abatement, so things that'll kind of block some of the sound. There's kind of a misconception that plants are good for soundproofing. They don't really fit that bill, but they do deflect some of that. There's also some privacy screening to keep people from getting close to your house or close to your fence line. I used to work at the Cincinnati Zoo, and it was very important for us to keep people from getting too close to the animal exhibits. So that was an example of screening for privacy from that perspective. So things like Poncirus with those nice big friendly thorns were great for that. Things like the toothache tree, that was great because it had thorns on the bark. Lots and lots of barberries. I think there's a barberry in our plant sale. The one that's in our plant sale gets kind of big, so you're going to get the visual as well as the do not touch screening, which is important. Roses are good for that. So those are some things to think about, those kinds of factors. What do you want the plants to do in terms of providing that screening, and what type of plants you want? So there's basically 2 types of things you're going to work with. Deciduous, things that lose their leaves, or evergreen plants. And most people think of evergreen when they think of screening. And that's obvious. They're going to have leaves on them. They're going to provide that screening year round. But there's a lot of deciduous things that you can use that provide, for lack of a better term, seasonal screening. Even in the wintertime when you've just got branches, there's going to be some screening provided, but it's going to let some light in the wintertime when you kind of want that anyway. So depending on your taste, those are some of the things that I would think about when you're selecting plants. For me, I really like things that are deciduous because you're going to have that season of interest that I talk about a lot. If you're ever around me, if you ever come to tours, that's something that I pound into the plants that I like and that I like to talk about: winter, spring, summer, fall interest. You don't get that all the time with evergreens. You'll get a lot of those factors, but with a deciduous plant, you're going to get winter, spring, summer, fall. So up here we have a viburnum, and this is Viburnum dilatatum, the arrowwood viburnum. It's a deciduous viburnum. It's going to have pretty good fall color, yellows to orange in the fall. Not a lot of winter interest because it's going to drop its leaves, but this one gets about 4 to 8 feet tall. You can prune it, so it's going to provide screening against the foundation, for doors, for windows, whatever you want. It's just now, the leaves have completely emerged, so it has a nice green color, not a lot of insects and diseases that affect this. It's going to get a really nice white flower on it, late spring, early summer. A little bit of fragrance, not much. And this one, this is a cultivar called Blue Muffins. After the flowers are done, the fruit will form and it gets blue fruit, hence the name Blue Muffins. So there you go, winter, spring, summer, fall interest in a deciduous package. A good plant that you can use for a screen. We had this in the plant sale. I'm not sure if we still do. It's worth a look, but this is something that we're going to try to replenish at the end of the week. So getting into the meat of providing a screen, and when you're screening for privacy, most people want to block that visual, and that's where evergreens are going to be kind of the best thing to do. Again, 2 things that we've got kind of in our plant sale that got the wheels turning for today to think about things to talk about. Daphnephilum. It's only Wednesday and my plant names are slipping. This is on the plant sale, sometimes called the poor man's rhododendron. This is a plant that if you can't grow rhodies, you can grow it in your landscape. Has kind of a similar look when it starts to branch out. They all kind of start out beanpole-esque, but they will branch out as they get bigger. Medium to fast growing, moist, well-drained soil it likes the best, but it can take some dry. Full sun to a little bit of shade, and this guy's evergreen again, so it's going to keep its leaves. It's got a nice kind of silvery white underside to the leaf, and the petioles on this, if you can get a close-up of that, are usually a nice red. There's some introductions to this, not a lot, but this is kind of a plant that flies under most people's radar. It's not something you're going to find everywhere. From a collector standpoint, it's cool to have, but it's a great privacy screening plant. Excuse me. You can plant a couple of these together to provide more bang for your buck, and that's really going to do the job that you want for that screening. Gets a little bit on the big side, so give it some room to do that. This is something that if you've got that spot down below your house on your driveway and you want to block a view up to your house, this is something that would work well for that. And again, I believe they're on our plant sale. And after we mention them, they'll go quick. But this is a plant that I like a lot because it's something you're not going to see everywhere. Another one in the mix that's used pretty much ad nauseum here is the whole realm of osmanthus in the landscape. This is fragrans. This one, you can see that new growth is kind of red. And those of you that tuned into my winter damage talk, it's got a little bit of winter burn on some of those new leaves that came out, but that's all purely aesthetic. It's going to drop those leaves and it's already pushing some new growth up. This plant's not going to skip a beat because of that little bit of browning, and those will just fall off by themselves. But this is a good evergreen for a lot of reasons. It can take our warm weather. It can take sun or a little bit of shade. It's not real finicky about soil. Like most plants, it likes moist, well-drained, but it can take a little bit of punishment in the soil department. Kind of a moundy shrub. This one can get 10 to 12 feet tall in a good year, and probably half as wide. But at least twice a year, early spring and early fall, it produces very, very fragrant flowers, hence the Latin name. This is one of my favorite osmanthus because it's one of the more cold hardy ones, and it's hard to delineate the fragrance of these, but I like the smell of this one a lot. It's a really, really nice plant. The new growth is extra nice. The older growth has kind of a sawtooth on the edge, where it also gets the name false holly, but you can't go wrong with osmanthus with that fragrance. So these are just some of the highlights that we had in the plant sale. There are also things that I like to push people in a direction for screening, and they work really, really well. So taking advantage of the space that we're in, it's really kind of closed off and has created privacy kind of on its own accord, almost kind of a garden room-esque. And there's a lot of different things in here doing that. Right behind us, I think we did the winter talk here, but we've got 2 different camellias. And it's kind of moot at this point because they don't have flowers on them, but they're really, really good for screening because they come in different heights, different widths. They can take a little bit of pruning. When we came up here and set up, somebody brought up the point, that they're a little bit slow to get established. That's even more reason to buy them bigger so that they're already kind of in that direction. But once they've been in the ground for a couple seasons, they tend to move relatively quickly. If you look over at this one on the left, Professor Charles Sargent, I think that's a big red flower. The new foliage on that is really nice, and I like that, kind of a reddish purple color. And a lot of the older japonicas tend to do that. So if you're looking for different seasons of interest, if you're looking for that different spark, that's a reason to put that into your landscape. Nestled in behind that is a deciduous plant, and it's not going to provide a lot of visual screening during the winter time, but winter is a short month. It may not feel like it when you're in it, but right now with the leaves emerged, it's providing a pretty good amount of screening and a little bit of sound abatement from Barrel Road. So in combination with evergreen stuff, you can mix in deciduous things. The things about some of the Japanese maples that I like is there's a color and a flavor and a size and a shape for everybody. There's fastigiate ones, there's low squat ones. So you could definitely incorporate something like that into a planning for screening. Don't limit yourself just to the evergreen plants. Deciduous things work pretty well also. Panning a little bit further left, oh, my brain just went blank. It's not taxus. Cephalotaxis, the prostrate low-growing one right there at the edge of the path. That's another good evergreen for screens. There are different cultivars. That might be the one from Duke Gardens, the lower growing one. But there are some of those that reach 15 feet tall, if not taller. Japanese plum yew is the common name. That's relatively easy to find in the landscape, and it adds to the diversity of evergreen things that are offered. If you don't want flowers, if you don't want kind of the same old, that's a good plant to look for. You see it a lot used in the South, but it's not used as much as some of the other things that are often thrown at us. Things like Leyland cypress, green giant arborvitae. There's better things to use, lots of other conifers and things like that. Also kind of rolling into that deciduous realm and also kind of tying in nicely with this nicely knit backdrop, another deciduous plant. This is a Kusa dogwood. That checks all my boxes for winter, spring, summer, fall interest. Nice bark in the wintertime, really nice foliage in the spring, a nice clean dark green. It has flowers that come before the leaves do, a nice yellow flower in early spring. It's one of the first things to go. But when the leaves come out, they're pretty dense. And this one has been pruned to kind of let us into the next part of the garden here. But grown to the ground, that's another good thing to add to that mix of evergreen screening options. There are many cultivars of this. There's one called Kintoki. that's more of an upright growing one that if you leave it branched to the ground will provide a nice pillar of deciduous screen. And again, fall color. So winter, spring, summer, fall. I really like that attribute. Continuing on around are some deciduous magnolias. We looked at some of these on our tour, and I like those as kind of a deciduous screen because the leaves tend to be kind of big. And once the flowers are done, that's going to be a good thing to add to kind of a higher backdrop to kind of break up things if you want to get closer to a house for upper windows or things like that. Again, every size imaginable in deciduous magnolias from a cultivar perspective. There's medium-sized ones, there's super tall ones. There's one that's a sentimental favorite of mine that actually has roots to the J.C. Raulston Arboretum called Swarthmore Sentinel. It's a fastigiate one and slowly starting to see it more in the trade, but that's a good one to add to kind of the palette of things that can be used for screening. And coming all the way around to the base of the crepe myrtle here, still showing some winter damage from my last talk, maybe a little bit more, is Sarcococa. And again, there's a couple of different species of that. There's a couple of different cultivars. You need lower plants to kind of take up that horizon from a privacy screen standpoint. And that one certainly fits that niche. There are some cultivars that are a little bit bigger, and it's going to provide that evergreen screening where you can't see it through at winter, spring, summer, or fall, and in that different kind of horizon. Kind of the cherry on top with that plant is it has a great, very, very fragrant flower. And last but least for a purpose is right next to that, a little meatball of a boxwood. Boxwoods are very, very common and a traditional plant used as a screen. And I don't mind them as much because there are so many cultivars that you can use. There's fastigiate ones, there's low growing ones, every kind of size you can think of, and pretty true and tested as a tough plant in the landscape, and one of the few remaining things that the deer have not chosen to add to their menu of things that they eat. It is evergreen, so kind of one note in that regard, but in terms of kind of standby things, as I inhale pollen, sorry, it's one that I do like to recommend because there are so many of them. A couple things that I think are worth staying away from, and we talked about earlier, are the aforementioned Leyland cypresses, the green giant arborvitae. They're readily available. You can get them anywhere, but more oftentimes than not, people will plant those in the wrong situations, either too close together, too close to a structure. A lot of times those plants have not been taken care of as they're stepped up through the nursery process and they have root problems. So you're getting a stressed out plant well beforehand. So we like to steer people away from those two usual suspects. They grow super fast, they're easy to find, and a lot of times it's easy to cave, but err on the side of diversity and look for some other things. We talked about Arizona cypress, Cupressus arizonica. There's one called Carolina sapphire that I like a lot. Great color. Carolina blue, if I may say, here at NC State, but a super tough plant. It can take inhospitable soil. It doesn't need a lot of irrigation aftercare, just kind of get it established. And you just cannot beat that color and texture of it in the landscape. It's something that can take some tough love. Some other things from a deciduous realm that we talked about earlier, and some things that may be in our plant sale still that are worth a check. Some of the low growing crepe myrtles are good. They're kind of in that horizon range where they'll grow up to the height of a window and kind of stop. Again, deciduous, but you're going to have flowers, you're going to have fall color, you're going to have nice bark in a more contained package. So look for some of those kind of smaller growing growing plants. We even talked about some perennials that can be used. If you think about how cool bananas look around ponds or water features, again, that's a 3-season plant because we typically cut those down in the late winter, but you can plant those really close together and you've got those nice straight trunks and that great big bold texture that in one growing season are going to provide some screening, particularly in pools. I like to tell people to plant them near pools. You're not going to be in the pool in the wintertime unless it's heated. So that thing will be screening when you're there if you kind of want that to provide that. So look at all those realms of plant material. Look at the shrubs. Look at small flowering trees, deciduous. Look at evergreen things, things that flower and whatnot. There's lots of options for things that you can use out in the world for that kind of stuff. That was a very quick ramble.
That was great. It was a great ramble.
Okay.
Good job, Greg. Well done. So we do have a couple of questions. Well, first question was with regards to the Daphnophyllum. Does it take shade?
It can take a little bit of shade. I think in dense shade, it's going to stay kind of leggy and it won't get as big. I've seen it in kind of a high filtered shade. It does better in that situation than dense, but it depends on what you want to use it for. If you want to have it in your collection because it's unusual and all you have is shade, I'm not going to not tell you to get it. If you're a plant collector and you don't have this plant, it's one to add to your list. So definitely get it. I want to say we might have a couple of these in the Lath House, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So it can take a fair amount of shade. If you wanted to get big and round, it's going to need more light to do that. So I skirted around that pretty good. It can probably take more shade than what we're saying here, but to get that nice shape, you're going to want a little more sun.
Okay. One question I had was, how necessary is pruning for creating good screens? That's
a really good point and something I overlooked really quickly. You can get super creative if you want to add pruning to a regiment like screening. I've used wires to grow plants up on. You could do that with annuals. I know people that have apartments that'll do that in a large container in a series of string or a trellis. Let an annual vine grow up to provide screening. You could go super crazy with something like an espalier. We prescribe that where I used to work as a alternative to hedges between buildings is plant a row of espalier, and you could do evergreen or deciduous on that. If you want to kind of keep things in bound, and I think that's one of those situations where it gives you a little bit more leeway to prune something that may not be pruned if you want to keep it contained from a screening perspective. So things like osmanthus can take pruning. Evergreen magnolias are great for screening, and they can take a certain amount of pruning. So think about things like that. We were talking a little bit ago. I've seen white pine planted as a screen, and the landowner sheared it like with a Christmas tree knife so that it had a nice kind of round, fuzzy caterpillar look to it. It was about 10 feet tall, but it was fascinating with that nice texture of the white pine. So there's definitely leeway to get creative with something like this.
Absolutely, yeah. And someone asked if we could post a list of the screening plants mentioned today. And I think the thrust of today is that you can be as creative as you want to be. You can use any and every plant you want to use so long as you're using it with like a specific purpose.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of some online sources where you could find stuff like that. There's a really good book that I recommend to people that's not super easy to find. Harrison Flint was a landscape horticulture professor at Purdue University. Got to meet him a couple of times, an amazing human being, great professor. He has a book called, I think it's North American Landscape Plants of North America. I think it's what it is. Google that, look for it. If you find it, snatch it up. In the back of that book, he's got all these lists of things that can take wind, things that can take salt spray, fastigiate trees, things for screening, it's a really, really good resource for that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool. So somebody says, sorry I arrived late, and this, I'm not sure what plant they mean, but maybe you do. They say, are ship laurels okay/good here?
Skip laurel.
Skip laurel.
I'm going to say he might be thinking about like Prunus lauroseraceus.
Okay.
Cherry laurel.
Sure, yeah.
I'm kind of on the fence about that because it tends to get overused in the landscape and it's highly susceptible to root rot, but they are a good evergreen, and there's different cultivars. The Skips laurel might be the Portuguese laurel, and I think that one gets a little bit bigger, but you do see that used a lot as a screen for landscapes. It's one of those things that I tend to steer people in the direction of other things. Has a similar texture to our Daphne-phyllum. I would rather plant that than a skip laurel, but you're not going to find that as frequently as you would the cherry laurel or the Skips laurel.
Sure.
So not my favorite plant to tell people, but it certainly would work.
Okay. And someone was asking about the blooms on the Daphne-phyllum. They asked, will all of them bloom or are some female and some male?
I have never seen it flower.
Huh.
To me, it remains kind of solely as a weird plant collector evergreen thing. But I personally have never seen it flower.
Okay.
And I've had this at gardens I've worked at all over the place, and I've never seen it flower.
Okay, cool.
That's something I'm gonna have to Google.
Sure. So someone's asking, for large evergreen shrubs and small trees to create a dense hedge, how close can they be planted?
You can kind of go crazy with that, and if they grow together, they grow together. It's going to provide an even better screen. Beech is used a lot as a hedging plant in Europe because it's got really tough wood, it's deciduous, it's got nice buds on it in the wintertime, nice new green foliage, and a lot of times they'll keep their leaves on it through the wintertime, and those are planted right on top of each other. So you could certainly do that. That's one of those situations where it's okay to plant too close because you want to kind of fill in. If you don't have the budget for plants, you can do a little trick of staggering them. So having kind of 2 6 to 8 feet apart and then put one offset in the middle. So when they grow up, they'll kind of touch a little bit. So that's something that I tell people to do. And that's a better way to keep those plants kind of playing nice together. So if you absolutely have to have things on top of each other and you've got the budget to do that, then you can do that.
Definitely. Yeah. We have Preston Montague, who's a landscape designer who teaches classes here and he gives talks for us sometimes. He talks about how when he considers how to fill a space with plants, he like relaxes his eyes and uses them as like Lego bricks and just kind of thinks about how they'll fit together. Like how you were talking about how you can find a magnolia or a maple in any shape and size. Like really you want to find whatever shape and size will fit whatever space you have there and then kind of tuck everything you can up to it and try to leave as little space as possible for, that kind of thing.
He's a smart cookie. I would, anything he says, I would listen to.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So let's see. Do you know the name of the author for the landscape plants of North America?
Harrison Flint.
Harrison Flint.
Flint.
Okay.
The book went out of, there was only one edition, and when he passed away, it became really popular and even harder to find. They printed a second edition, and that's a little bit easier to find. If you looked on Amazon, you might run across it. Sometimes it's super pricey, sometimes it's not. That's a book that if I found it and you found a used one, I would snatch it up because it's that good of a book.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think that is all the questions that we have in the chat for today. So thank you.
Fast and furious.
Wasn't it though? But hey, it was a lot of good information. I hope we opened some people's minds too to some new ways to screen some plants. So thank you so much, Greg, for pulling this talk together for us. Thank you everybody for joining us at home. I do hope you will join us next week for the midweek program. Tim will be going deeper in the garden talking about Acer, not just Acer rubrum and Acer palmatum, but all the obscure maples that we have planted in the garden as well. So that should be a lot of fun. And make sure that you check out our plant sale, which is going on, and it will close tomorrow at 10. So you have plenty of time to snag some more plants. Okay, we'll see y'all next week. Y'all take care.